Hi Dino, nice to have you here today.
Hi Nathan, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How do you pronounce your surname?
So it's Dino, not Chiavelli.
Machiavelli, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for coming on today. The podcast I run, I know you've seen some of the work I do. I just like to look into the ordinary and the extraordinary lives, people, people and the things they do. And I think you're a very interesting man that does very extraordinary things for people. So I just want to get into it. Please tell me a bit about yourself,
Yeah, so I'm a solicitor, I'm a partner, specialised in representing abuse survivors. Um, and I work predominantly from my London office, but actually I've got clients all over the country and all over the globe. And I think when I first started doing this work over 10 years ago, um, I probably was perhaps a bit naive as to where abuse took place or what is abuse. I understand what sexual abuse is, but physical, emotional, verbal, racial, neglect, spiritual abuse, the list goes on. And I appreciated perhaps abuse by teachers or maybe in boarding schools, but not to the same extent within the family home or children homes or the scouts or sports clubs or the military, cadets, the list goes on. Whereas an adult and a child, there's a risk of abuse. So that's a little bit about myself. And I'm happy to answer any questions you've got. I think it's really important the work you do and trying to break down some of these barriers. So yeah, ask whatever you
Nathan?
want, Nathan.
Well, my first question is, what can you share what initially motivated you to specialise in representing victims of child sexual assault and exploitation and sexual assault in general? What driven you to do that?
Yeah. I suppose there's a couple of points. One is, um, sometimes people say it's a cliche, but to make a difference, to make change. I did train initially to be a corporate lawyer, and I didn't particularly enjoy it, to be totally frank. It just didn't do anything for me. So I came into litigation to make a difference, and I think, especially when you look into this area, um, it is one which is so large and yet also so small. It is
Mm,
something which affects so many people, yet so few talk about it. And I think that if you know, within a generation or within my lifetime, if we're able to break some of those barriers down, whether it's in different areas of abuse or for different sectors of society, there's still a barrier for lots of different religions, still a barrier for men to talk about mental health, let alone abuse. If we can do that, that would be good. If we can try to raise issues in the media, if we can try to change laws, and we have been able to do that, it does mean then the next generation should be safer and it should be easier, hopefully, for people to disclose. It's one of my main missions is to um, try to reduce that age of disclosure. On average, people are still disclosing in their 40s, and I support my clients to change that and to try to improve awareness, improve, make it easier. If we can do that, we can stop abuse, and that must be what we all want, really.
So what you're saying there is that a lot of people which are sexually assaulted or abused as children, they don't really come out with the information until they're 40. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's definitely right. We know that it takes men longer than women. We know that there's other additional barriers, who abused you, how frequently, the extent, the severity, and those kind of questions. But yeah, on average, people don't disclose until their 40s. Lots of people will never talk about it. Lots of people will take it to their grave. And there's numerous barriers to that. And also, sometimes, even if people have told someone, they're not listened to. When you look at Rochdale, Rotherham, and the grooming gangs, they did try to talk. We've seen instances within the Catholic Church and boarding schools and football clubs, again where children perhaps have told someone, which is very unusual, but then they're ignored. So yeah, the average age of disclosure is still in their 40s.
See, I've experienced a friend uh, which have had the same thing, same thing happened to them. They expressed what happened and it wasn't believed. And also later on in life, they come out with what happened to them. So that I have experience of that. And it's for me, 'cause I've never been a victim of sexual assault. It's a phenomenon for me of how people live with it, and for so long. And it just, and some people live with this forever. And then there's a point where it comes out and it's just, yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? And it's really, really difficult to understand if you've not been through that. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, what challenges do you face, like with the field and with being faced with these things? Like, because you must, you must have access to some information which not many people really want to see. What is that like for you?
Yeah, it's obviously harder for the children affected than it is for
Oh, yeah,
me, and I'm fully appreciative of that.
yeah,
Um, but it is difficult because you do see the worst in society. I've got a young child now, and I'm really lucky to have them. But it does bring it back you know, to the fore, and especially when you're looking around society, there's not really any person in society, any kind of role, which unfortunately we haven't seen abuse take place, and that is really depressing. Um, you do hear and see the worst. And what I try to do is to hopefully create change and hopefully help people to make a difference. And ideally, not to be speaking to individuals who have suffered abuse in the Scouts, let's say, or in football clubs in 5 years, 10 years. So if we can break the cycle, that has to be the mission. So at the moment, and I hope that will continue until I die, that is where I try to bring some positivity from something which is extremely grim, to be totally frank. It's absolutely devastating to hear the abuse, to see the abuse, see impact on someone's life, and then the damage caused because they are unable to talk about it for so long, and the ripple effect, how it affects people close to them, friends, family, partners. And there's still areas of society, children in care, there's significant issues and it's concerning what's going to happen in the future because we know that the funds are just not there. And unfortunately, we can see that those children who are in care perhaps aren't listened to as much as others. Um, and it's only going to get worse. So again, there's a lot more work to be done. But to answer your question, which is very simple and very fair, it's hard. It's really hard to listen to. And I think everyone who deals with this area of law and works with abuse survivors, sometimes you do have to have a breather and go, this is awful, but there is hope. And the fact that someone's spoken to me, hopefully, that will make things better for them and others. That's what we have to try to do.
credit to your character as a human being to be able to do this, to give this service to people and fight for them and give and sacrifice a bit of yourself as well. So credit for you for that, because it cannot be easy and it cannot be for everyone either, can it really? You know?
Yeah, no, yeah, no, that's fair. That's a fair comment.
I've got a I don't know the statistics. I mean, I know general ones. I was in care, and I knew stuff was going on. Not with the staff and the children, but with grooming gangs, the young girls around me. They were going off, getting drunk, drugs, very young age. So I've experienced that, and it wasn't nice. I'm 36 now, it was a long time ago, but still, like, it still happens now, which is quite sad. But how common is the problem of child sexual exploitation and sexual assault because one thing we discussed previously in a private phone call was people think it's in sports clubs, it's in Westminster, it's in all these things that get highlighted, but it's actually not, is it? It's more serious in the family home, is it? And there's a statistic you told me where it's more likely to happen by someone you know. Can you go through that, please?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, and I'll go off and play football with my brothers and so on, my mum would always say, don't take sweets from strangers, stranger danger, don't speak to weird men in the park, etc. Um, but she never said that about my football coach or my priest or my school teacher or my dad even or one of my uncles. And we know that 99% and the rest of abusers are men. That is right. Um, just from a totally logistical point of view, which is quite sad to talk about when we're talking about child safeguarding. If you have 24 hours in a day, who do you spend the most time with? It is your family members, your neighbours, your brothers. Then it would be your school teachers, and you may spend an hour with a football coach, an hour with a priest. So you can see how it slowly gets eroded the amount of time. How often do you see a celebrity, or how often do you see um, someone who's in a position of extreme power, extreme wealth, and like again, you can see how that over a 12-month period is less and less and less. So the vast majority of abuse does take place in the family home because the access is there and the trust is there. In that, of everyone in the world who you trust your parents, your siblings, your family members. you do, or your family friends, because they are in and around you, rather than your teacher, who you only see for 6 weeks and you're off for a week and so on. It is an inherent problem, and it's not only just the grooming and manipulation is bad, but if you then want to disclose the abuse, it isn't that Mr. Thomas is a pervert or Mr. Smith is a sexually abusing football coach. It's your dad. It's your granddad, and that is a bomb. So it isn't just, oh God, yeah, he's a bit weird. What do you mean your granddad? What do you mean your uncle? You can understand how that causes so much trauma. And what you see is that there's two sides. It always is. It turns into like a random Jeremy Kyle episode. And it'd be like, no, dad's amazing, dad's amazing, dad's amazing. No, dad's actually a child abuser. Dad's a child abuser. And
Yeah.
that is devastating. And even where there's findings, what would your mum do? Would they go with
And
the
I
dad
think,
was,
sorry to interrupt you, the thing is, people wouldn't want to believe it. They're blaming the child first, wouldn't they? Well, you're just seeking, you want this, you want that. So so the victim blaming, and that happens quite a lot, doesn't it?
victim blame is a real issue, yeah. And I think it's difficult for people to understand or appreciate that abusers aren't weirdos and they're not monsters. They're normal people. If they were a monster or a weirdo, you'd cross the road. You wouldn't go near them.
Yeah,
They have to be normal for you to trust them. And I think that's really damaging. And then that's very conflicting because, of course, an abuser doesn't just manipulate and groom a child. They have to groom the environment, the village, to get that kind of status. Because then, the man who gives millions to charity, why would he abuse children? His name is Jimmy Savile, by the way.
yeah, yeah.
The person who's really nice with children and teaches them, football and so on, why would he be abusing children? It's they may be very nice men. They could also be covering up some heinous and awful crimes. So yeah, in the family environment, it's extremely difficult to comprehend, and often people just cannot handle the truth. To be totally frank, um, we've had cases where abusers have pleaded guilty, saying, "Yeah, I did do it," but their wives don't leave them. And you're thinking, well, why? Because he's admitted he did it. Why would you stay with this person, especially when they've abused your own child? It is something which is really difficult to understand, and sometimes the human brain will just go denial, denial, denial,
Yeah.
and just will not accept it. But it can cause huge trauma in family environments, especially when they've only abused one of the children rather than all of the children.
Yeah.
And that's where most abuse happens, and especially in care. It is so significant and it continues to the current day, unfortunately.
Yeah, because you said statistically it's almost higher. I think what were the stats you actually said? It was one in, I can't remember the numbers, but do you know the
Yeah.
numbers for the
Well,
care?
yeah, well, it's the problem is that the statistics are only based on what we know. So if you imagine an iceberg, these statistics are only the tip because lots of people will never disclose their abuse. So from the ones which we know, about three quarters, I think the most latest statistics was abuse within the family home,
Wow.
which again makes sense because everyone has um, a biological family and neighbours, and that is, quite obvious that that is the greatest risk. Um, the issues then is when we're talking about the consequent abuse and people who are vulnerable, people who can be targeted, and that's what you then see, unfortunately, with care and other settings. You can see that because
Yeah.
often they're trying to
Yeah.
reach out. If I've suffered abuse in the home, I want to now reach out to someone and say, look, can you be a role model me? Can you support me? Sadly, people take advantage of that vulnerability and again suffer further abuse.
It's so sad. I just, yeah, I've got so many friends, obviously from the care system and just normal life, like walks of life, which and ironically, yesterday, a friend come out with something that happened to her children, which has never been spoken before. And I said, tomorrow I'm doing a podcast about this, and it was just the timing was very, very, very odd, that this was happening today. And I don't want to share that personal stuff because obviously that's between that and business. I wanted to sort of move on to so sort of legal processes and the strategies of stuff. Right? So, could you walk us through the typical legal process for a victim of sexual assault or child sexual assault? What are the key stages so people could be educated in how this works?
Yeah. So there's a couple of key building blocks for a legal case. Um, And there's a difference between criminal and civil. So the first thing, if someone came to us, we would advise them in the first instance to report their abuse to the police and to go down the criminal process, which means that they report to the police, give a statement, a video statement to the police. They would collate the evidence, pass it to the Criminal Prosecution Service, which are lawyers for the government, and then look to hopefully press charges and lead to either an admission of guilt or a finding by a jury. And that's not always possible. Sometimes there's not enough evidence. Sometimes the abuser's dead. Sometimes the abuser's moved to the Philippines or some other country abroad. You can still pursue a civil action in certain circumstances. Now, with a civil case, that is looking towards the school, the church, sports clubs, potentially the individuals involved or the local council. One thing we do need to do is prove that the abuse took place, and there's a different burden of proof. So in the criminal law, it's beyond all reasonable doubt, to be sure, so 98, 99% certain. In the civil law, it's lower, it's 51%. So more likely than not, on the balanced probabilities, this happened. So first we need to prove the abuse took place. As an example, Jimmy Savile, never charged, never convicted of abuse, but in the civil, it was understood that he was, on the balanced probabilities, a prolific child abuser. So that's the first thing, prove the abuse. There are time limits in the civil courts to bring a case. Technically, you're supposed to start your court case by your 21st birthday. Now, like I said before, abuse survivors are just unable to do that. So what we look to do instead is to rely upon the court's discretion to show a fair trial is still possible in relation to witnesses and proving the abuse and the impact on someone, and to show there were good reasons for not coming forward earlier. And often that relates to shame and embarrassment and not wanting to cause trauma to those around them or not being in a psychological state to bring a legal case. So after proving the abuse and proving the connection between the abuser and the school, the church, the football club, the scouts, whoever it was, we then need to look at the impact on someone's life. And that's a really key thing, because often if you're coming to us when you're in your 40s, this abuse may have affected your relationships, drink, drugs, self-harm, suicide attempts, qualifications, your career path, if you're self-employed or not, every single possible relationship, do you have children or not? It's a significant thing which we need to consider, and we would instruct a consultant psychiatrist and potentially other experts to consider the impact on someone's life. And then we look to engage with the other side, hopefully reach a settlement, and if not, go down the court proceedings and go to a trial. In the civil, only about 2 to 3% of cases go to trial because there's numerous factors in it, but it is a painful and costly process for the defendant and also for the survivor of abuse. It does bring forward lots of media attention as well, and I think the defendants are very conscious of that. And if you have very trained lawyers on both sides, you should hopefully be able to figure out these are the cases which should settle. If it's a very complex legal matter, then fair enough, it need to be tested. But that's the general process. And I think the key thing is speaking to specialist abuse lawyers so they can give you honest advice. What you want is someone just to give you straightforward black and white advice. I think so many abuse survivors have been mugged off for a lot of their life and given false truths. You just need to know where you stand. I think that's a really important thing. And what can be done. And lots of abuse survivors perhaps do not want a criminal prosecution or to bring a civil case. Perhaps they want to take part in an inquiry, call for a campaign, raise something in the media, just to be able to tell their parents, by the way, I suffered abuse. There's so many things that people want. And I think that talking about it, but like your friend, that is the first step, actually, because the problem shared is a problem which is hopefully easier for you to bear. And hopefully it will relate to actual action, which will create change. That's the hope.
Thank you, Dino. That's really, really interesting and very educational. What I wanted to ask was, you represent both adult and child clients, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So, what's the unique challenges between representing a child in this situation, adult, and like, because you've already delved into that a little bit when people are adults and they've suffered that as children. What's the unique difference and what are the unique challenges between the two for you?
Yeah, so we represent children who suffered abuse. We represent adults who suffered abuse as children, and we also represent adults who suffered abuse as adults as well.
Yeah,
There's different hurdles to all of them. With the child, ideally you want to get them back on track. And what that means is if you've had your GCSEs disrupted or A levels or whatnot, if you can get that input back in to improve your education, it means you can fill that gap. You may be delayed by a period of time, but your life will continue along that path which was destined for you, even though there will be hurdles, therapy, relationships, education. And we know how important education is, that the graduate benefit is so significant. And over your lifetime, you will learn so much more as a graduate than not. We also know that people in care are at such a disadvantage in relation to education, increased risks of imprisonment and drug use and alcohol use. So that's the first thing. What's very important is that even if a child seems they're doing fine now, we do need to be very careful because all they need is for something to happen, divorce of their parents, a relationship breakup, which, as a 12-year-old, you're going to realistically face a relationship breakup in your lifetime, maybe other impacts in their life or entering the workplace. We have to be very cautious of that. It is hard to predict what the future is going to hold. From my experience, you need to have that support in place. Now, with adults suffer abuse in childhood, you can kind of see where there's been bumps. You can see that, and you can see you've done this because of this reason. You don't like men telling you what to do. You don't like being one-on-one with someone. You don't like socializing in the workplace. So you can see how they're just slowly cutting off parts of their life, which then affects their relationships and affects their work opportunities. So you can see that for adults who suffer abuse as adults, you see often an immediate shock to the system. I think it's often easier for them to understand I have been abused as an adult. There's still elements of shame and embarrassment, but an adult who suffered abuse as a child, they often try to process it as an adult. So, for example, I don't know if any of your listeners are, under 10 or whatever, but Santa doesn't exist. Okay. Now, hopefully you know that. Father Christmas is not real, right? But at the age of 5 or 7 or 8 or whenever you found out he wasn't real, you believed that. You believed the man came round to your house on Christmas Eve and popped down a chimney. We didn't have a chimney, so again, my mum said, I didn't know what my mum said anyway. He got into our house somehow and gave presents. You just believed it and genuinely believed it. As an adult, to understand, well, why did I keep on going back to my abuser? Why didn't I tell anyone about my abuser? Why didn't I punch my abuser? Why didn't I push my abuser away? Because you're trying to do it as an adult. And what we're very keen to do is to see childhood photographs because that's who we're dealing with. But that concept is very difficult. And as
yeah,
an adult survivor of childhood abuse, you have huge elements of guilt. Because if I
yeah.
had said something, yeah, I could have saved other children. I could have stopped others suffering abuse. It's a real issue which
And
survivors.
that is what happened with a friend of mine. And she was abused about 12 years old. She never come forward till she was, I think in her 20s, 21. And she's seen it happening from afar to somebody else. And she said, this isn't happening. She said, this is not happening. And she come forward. And I think he abused, the perpetrator abused 5 girls. And he got 8 years or something, which is quite easily sentenced for what he'd done. Which is something I don't want to get into because I think a lot of people disagree with the sentencing for these crimes compared to other crimes, which people get much larger sentences for. But yeah, but it's poignant what you're saying. I can relate to that by personal experience with friends which have been through that. And how do you
Just with
balance? Sorry,
just
sorry,
with the
sorry, Jim.
sentencing, just with the sentencing,
Yeah,
Nathan. Just because I know you don't want to get into it, and I think that's
yeah,
fair,
yeah,
but it's an important, it is an important thing because, and it is relevant to current issues.
yeah.
So, if well, what is the point of a criminal punishment? What is the point?
Mm,
Is it for a deterrent? So, look, Nathan, stop nicking Mars bars from shops because you're gonna go to
mm,
prison because that's what happened to me. I went to prison for sticking
yeah,
Mars bars. You
yeah,
go, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. It's not worth it. That's a deterrent, right? is it for punishment, to punish me personally, not to stop other people from committing crimes, but to punish me because it was so bad? I stole your TV, I should go to prison. Or is it for rehabilitation? Look, you've gone into the wrong kind of area, you need to come into prison and we can break that cycle and change things up. Now, different crimes, the criminal punishment, so rehabilitation, punishment, and deterrent, has different values for different crimes. So for drug offences, you can understand how, regardless of your view on drugs, you can see how in prison you could rehabilitate someone and
Yeah.
get them clean and break the cycle and get them back into education and get them a proper job, and then they can leave that kind of sect of their mates and so on. You can understand that. With sexual abuse, most people would say you can't, or it would be very, very difficult to rehabilitate. And other countries have tried it. With things like child abuse images and child abuse videos, 8 in 10 people do not receive an actual prison sentence. They don't spend a day in prison. That was from December 2023, the National Crime Agency. That's where those stats come from. So 8 in 10, or 4 in 5 people do not spend a day in prison for having thousands of child abuse images and videos. Now, is that a deterrent to stop you from doing it? Well, I suppose it can't really be. Is it a rehabilitation? Well, no, because you're not being rehabilitated. And is it a punishment? Because you get a suspended prison sentence and the like. There's some real serious questions, and we don't have enough space in prisons. But I think you do need to understand what's the point of prisons.
Yeah.
And the people who are in prison have those three things I said: rehabilitation, punishment, deterrent. Are the right people in prison? Yes or no? That answers your question, which again, I don't want to detract
Yeah.
or distract from, but I think it's very relevant. And what I see from my clients' perspectives, when they tell us, they do say, well, why did they get that? When I've seen someone else get this, it's a totally valid question. I think we need to have a bit more of a frank discussion about it
Yeah,
because
well, this is the
not,
beauty of I wanted
yeah,
to.
yeah,
It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to a lot of people. Question
yeah,
because we never discussed talking about. I'm glad you're happy to talk about it because it's something I do want to talk about. I
yeah,
didn't. We never discussed actually speaking about it. I mean, for instance, a drug dealer
yeah,
will get 16 years for a packet of drugs, and a man who abused 5 girls got 8 years. So that's
yeah,
5 victims which all deserve their equal amount of prison time for him. But also, he's a dangerous man, and I believe that certain crimes, of certain nature, are you ever safe to be released? Should you be on lifelong restrictions because of them crimes? And I don't think that's happening, and I think it's wrong. How do you feel about that?
yeah. I think it's I think we do need to have a sit down and
Mm.
reconsider these issues. I think we really do. There's a campaign I did with some of my clients who were abused by their football coach, Bob Higgins, who's a Southampton
Yeah,
football coach. He also coaches other clubs. And there's about double jeopardy, which means you can't be tried for the same criminal offence twice. Um, uh, and there's only certain exceptions: murder, rape, treason, basically those which carry life sentences. But for our clients, they had suffered a significant number of indecent assaults, and the law just said no, it is not sufficient. And you do have to look at it and think, well, why is that? And often, as lawyers, we just follow procedures and don't bring in the human factor. And I think that often we need to question, why are you committing those offences? So the drug dealer you just mentioned, right? You don't just wake up one day and become a drug dealer. You use drugs, you get into the scene, you then progress up, and then you deal. And even with the class of drugs, you don't go straight in at class A. You work. You don't work your way up, but you increase. That's what
mm,
happens.
mm,
So, well, why did you start using drugs? What went on in there? If we can stop people entering that area, then we should do so. So as a country, you know, using those three examples again, rehabilitation is really important. Giving more money to local communities, sure start schemes and all these kind of things are really important to get kids off
yeah,
our streets. Similar to these far right protests, and why are you doing it for? So when I said before, we shouldn't call abusers monsters because that means it's fine. Not fine, but as in they're monsters and they're just evil by themselves, but they're not. They operate in society with the rest of us. So
Mhm.
how have they been able to do it? For people who are protesting, whether it's about the environment or about immigration or whatever else, why are you doing that for? And I think we do need to have that greater dialogue. Going back to your question about prisons, why is a drug dealer, using an example, 16 years when sexual abuse is 8? Why is that? And why in 4 and 5 people who have sexual abuse images of children, why do they not go to prison for? Because of course the children are abused in those images.
Yeah.
There seems to be some serious questions and a
And
reevaluation of it.
supply and demand, as they say. So, you
Yeah,
know, like drug dealers, street dealers, they go to prison. Lesser sentences
yes,
than the bigger drug dealers, but they still go to prison. So I believe that the people supplying the market, which the people buying or viewing these images, should be going to prison, and they should be, and that will break the cycle of what's happening. Because if there's no consequence, if they're getting community service or suspended sentence, they're not paying for the crime. It's not serious enough. And I believe that's a real bad approach, and it's a wrong precedent to set. And a lot of people say it. I mean, you hear it in music, you hear it on the telly, you hear it in the street. Why do dealers get longer than a rapist? Or why do dealers get longer than child sexual exploiters? What, child rapists? Why is this happening? And it's strange because drugs cause problems, but people ask for drugs. No one
yeah,
asks to be sexually
yes,
assaulted,
yeah.
raped, or
You,
indecently, treated. And this is
yeah,
and this is this is the crazy thing. I say a drug dealer gets caught with a kilo of cocaine. Average sentence is 16. Yeah, that's the average sentence. A kilo of cocaine. But like out of experience, a friend which was a victim of a man which raped 5 women, 5 young girls, or sexually assaulted them for 8 years, and you're thinking it just doesn't add up. And I don't know what the answer is, because if the answer is to me, it could be the other way around. He should have got 16, and the drug dealer should have got 8. And I'm not minimising the effect of drugs on society or the effect of drugs, but
no,
I think there's
no.
a massive difference in the effect and the what's the word I'm looking for? The reason why they commit these crimes are massively different as well. You know?
One thing is that the way the law does it is that you can only be tried and convicted for the laws at the time. So people who committed offences in 1960 can only be tried on laws which were effective in 1960s. So that could be one answer as to why the laws aren't as severe. Saying that, viewing child abuse images and videos is a more recent crime, same as child abuse dolls or AI and all this kind of stuff. So it's relatively modern laws, and it's trying to deal with an issue which people haven't really focused on. And I think sometimes it comes down to politics. You know, politicians are in position for 4 or 5 years, and often you've got to be hard on crime. So, using your example, you're saying for the drug dealer, we should put our arm around them and say, why did you do this for? Do you need, access to support? Do you need to get clean? Do you need to have, money and a proper working life? The answer probably is yes. But politically, that doesn't look very attractive because you're not being hard on crime. But I've always thought that try to be black and white in life because I think it's really important. Um, that is the answer. Well, otherwise, we're going to be facing the same drug issues in 5, 10 years. There's no difference. It's a bit like the shootings in America. You've got to change it. We can't keep on going through. Oh, yeah, there's another school. 10 kids have got shot. It just you can't do that. It's devastating. So um, I think we do need to sit down and look at it. The problem is that often those who are getting done for drug offences, again, it's a generalisation, but it's technically true. If you have lower, middle, upper class, usually the people doing the drugs, generally speaking, are lower class. And that may be a reason why, again, it's not been looked at to the same extent it should be. I think, drug offences are a significant issue and can be a huge problem for society. But I think we do need to look into it and we do need to consider why. And I think from our work with sexual abuse survivors, um, you know, if 4 and 5 people do not get prison sentences for viewing, thousands of child abuse images and videos, then it does seem wrong because there's thousands of children abused for your sexual pleasure.
Yeah.
That has to be
It has to be
wrong.
addressed, it has to be looked at, and it has to be done quickly, because I think people are getting society's starting to get very angry about it, I think. Why
Mm.
the difference in what's happening. I mean, but to stop oil protesters, for instance, well, we're going a little bit into politics here, but it seems to be what politically is attractive at the time, and I don't think they want to talk about this problem because I think one thing I'd seen, and I can't remember where I seen it was on a seller. I think the reason is they haven't got the faith, like you said, they cannot address this problem. They need hundreds of thousands of prison spaces because the problem is that big. I think you said the tip of the iceberg example. Like I think the problem is that big. They're afraid of it. They're afraid of facing it. That's what I believe.
It could be a live risk because I mean I think from all of the issues which we see, we know not every drug dealer has been arrested. We know that, but the iceberg example which we've just both used, the the tip is perhaps lower for the iceberg for the drug dealer. So the majority of it probably is out in normal society. You can see it, you can view it. We kind of know
Yeah,
what's going on to a large extent. With child abuse, no, it is so uncovered and it's a real concern. And yeah, it's that's the reason why we're very keen to encourage abuse survivors to talk. We do need police officers, CPS, prison spaces. Otherwise, it's a bit of a wet. Um, is it squid or squib? I don't know.
is it
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is a bit. It'd be like, "Oh, come forward. We're going to take it seriously." And then actually, you see these things, and you're like, "Well, it doesn't reflect the impact of the crime. It's not proportionate, perhaps."
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I agree with me, and that's right. This subject, even to me now, it's so important, but so deflating. It gives me anxiety because it's such a serious thing that's happening, and it's horrible what's happening, and there's no answer to it at the moment, and it's just so sad. And for me, just doing this podcast now is making me feel a certain way, And you live this. This is your profession. You suffer with the client, and it just I can't I don't know, it's hard to explain what I'm feeling. And I really really respect you for what you do. It's just amazing. And I wanted to follow on with a question. Have you ever been involved, or you might not be able to talk about, but any real significant cases where anything like legal precedent was set, or very very high profile cases?
Yeah. So we've uh, done a number of legal cases of high profile, where it's against very wealthy and famous individuals for abuse in football, abuse in sport, swimming, gymnastics, and the like, whether it's ITV, BBC, Sky documentaries, Panorama for abuse in ballet, Channel 4 dispatches again for abuse in football. Um, those have been extremely high profile. Again, ITV, BBC, all of these outlets for abuse in the Scouts, which have been very high profile. So yeah, it has been a lot, and nearly every couple of days we are speaking to journalists. We are exposing abuse in different schools, different areas of society, which all has an impact. And there's more to come. Sadly, over the next couple of months, there'll be more to come in relation to abuse and things being exposed. Obviously, Hugh Edwards is going to be sentenced in September, the ex-newsreader for BBC. There's further things which are in the pipeline, sadly, looking at different areas which have not been perhaps had the same exposure, and they probably deserve it. But for every single high profile case, for every single case we bring against a football club or gymnastics, British gymnastics, or against um, the Scout Association or a boarding school, every case we take on, there's 3 to 4 cases which are in children's homes or in someone's family home, which doesn't get the same media attention,
Yeah.
to be frank. And I'm very conscious of that because if I've done 1,000 media pieces, I can tell you perhaps 10 of them would be on abuse in the family home. That's how the disparity is. And when we did work on Telford and the grooming gangs and elsewhere there, they can be picked up by the wrong messengers, to be frank.
Mhm.
Um, Abuse does not discriminate,
Mhm.
sadly. based on sex or race or time or class or anything at all. Anyone can be an abuse survivor. But I think when we're looking at who gets the most media coverage, it is usually those institutions. And I
Yeah.
think that children in care don't get the same um, exposure or coverage. People perhaps don't appreciate the impact on them. And even something like having a protected characteristic, being a care leaver as a protected characteristic just isn't enforced in this country. It's not a law. And I think perhaps it is needed because you
Yeah.
look at the impact of care leavers and the disparity of their lives compared to others, it is so large.
And I suffered. I suffered
Okay,
a lot of hardship, self-inflicted, but unintentional because of certain things that
yeah,
happen. It's
yeah,
difficult. It's very difficult, and it does have a massive impact on your life.
yeah,
From one of my children's homes, I think I was 7. I remember me included one of them. I think 4 of them are dead before 36. Before those things.
and it's when you compare it to normal society. If you had 7 people, how many of them would have died by, like you said, 36? I don't know, 0.01. How many would have died from drug overdoses? So it's a really good example, sadly, of that. And then from the 7 of you, how many of you went to university? And university is not the be all and end all, but you can see how that can create a cycle of
I mean, I
uh,
had the same problem. I was never on hard drugs like heroin or anything, but I mean, around that age, we were angry,
yeah,
and we had all these mixed feelings, and we were drinking from 13, 14. We was doing silly things. It's just so the life is so different for them children, and
yeah,
that's why I can see they're so easily manipulated and so easily targeted by perpetrators of abuse, and
yeah.
it's just too much, man. It's
I mean,
too
one
much.
thing is, let's say abuse has then taken place. The filter of abuse on top of a care leaver or someone who's in care, it is so hard to distinguish because all the things you just mentioned, hitting out the system, disliking people in authority, um, trying to prove yourself, but also needing care and support, drink, drugs, that's nearly akin to it being an abuse survivor, but it's displaying each other in different manners. So it is a real factor. It's a real concern. And with children's homes up and down the country, and you move far away from your family unit as a thing. Lots of these children's homes are now privately run. It's it seems to be quite profitable to run a children's home, which is really sad.
This is really
Um,
sad, yeah. And I didn't know this, and just some research I've done recently, that absolutely anybody can open a children's home. There is no accreditation. There is no actual. Uh,
yeah,
that anyone could do it. I could do it. You could do it.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. There's 2 examples. One is I won't say who it is, but they set up they converted a garage to look after children,
Yeah.
and it wasn't it it wasn't you wouldn't it was basically squatting in a garage, and they were getting paid a lot of money for that. The second example is a TV celebrity who set up a children's home, and it's now been closed down because of failings. But the amount of money being paid, and it's, if you and your listeners and viewers, is a journalist called Martin Barrow, who does exclusively talks about this area, and he does a newsletter called Week in Care, and it just talks about issues, um, reports, inspections, and the amount of money which is coming through this. Now, if you're going to profit from children's suffering, in essence, at least do a good job. And what I mean by that is that
Mm.
it isn't like they're being paid, 100,000 to look after 10 kids in a year. And all right, we should be doing it in the state, but we can't. Private dentists, private opticians, private, knee surgery. We understand private costs more, but it's when you see the failings and again the lack of accountability. And like your point mentioned, you can set up a children's home tomorrow. That terrifies me, not because it's you,
Yeah.
by the way, Nathan, but
Yeah.
like that, like you probably will cock up. That's the truth. Not intentionally, one of your kids will get electrocuted. You ever want to
I
fall down
think
the
the
stairs?
motivation, what I think we're getting at, Dino, is the motivation behind it, where there's
Is
not
it profit?
the people
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
it
yeah.
for profit. Isn't it? It's not. They're not motivated to do it for change, or they're doing it for profit because there's massive amounts of money involved, isn't there?
It's huge. It is. It's a really profitable area. and I say surprisingly so, but it is, and it is a concern
It's good
because
to
you
hear.
read Martin's when you read one or two articles, you will see one or two cases. I specialize in this area.
Yeah,
But when you get this newsletter from Martin, when you do start picking up on it, you do see failure after failure after failure. Now, failure isn't a news article. Failure is a child being harmed,
yeah,
and I think it's really important. Um, so yeah, it's a significant issue. And like I said at the very beginning,
yeah,
100 children, who, three-quarters of them are at risk of abuse in the home or children's home. And yet it's not the ones which are as high profile. So when we've talked about, the scouts and boarding schools and football clubs and gymnastics and Catholic Church and Church of England and the Guardian and BBC and Times and so on, I don't think children in care get the same. Well, they don't get the same coverage. It's not an opinion. It's an actual fact. They don't.
which they should
They
do
should.
now. And this is because I suffered care. I'm on the other side. I'm at a stage in my life where I'm more stable to do stuff like I'm doing now. I can start trying to make change, and slowly I want to start getting involved with certain things and trying to make a bit of a difference. But that's a that's a slow process for me at the moment. But it's something I want to be involved in. And what I wanted to ask you as a question as a professional is, what advice you give to viewers? We sit here maybe think, actually I want to do something. They want to get involved in organisations or help victims, or what stuff is out there for people to get involved in to help? Is there anything you know of?
Yeah, no, we, there are a number of things that people can get involved in. It's often like, knowledge is power, isn't it? And it's usually got to look towards the gatekeepers. So the gatekeepers, I would say, are local abuse charities, because often they do know what's happening in events and inquiries and the like. Speak to a specialist abuse lawyer, speak to the police, speak to your local MP, but reaching out to those gatekeepers, I think it's really important that people with lived experiences are able to contribute and talk about this. What you don't want is some stiff old man in an ivory tower saying this is what abuse survivors do, because you don't know what's happening actually on the ground. And we've seen this a number of times. People don't really know what they're doing and they're talking about it. So one example is the Olympics recently. So Paula Radcliffe, running legend, etc. Um, and there's a Dutch volleyball player who was convicted for raping a 12-year-old when he was 19. He flew over from the Netherlands to the UK, raped her numerous times, went to prison for 4 years. He was sent back to the Netherlands when he spent 1 year in prison, and he represented his country, the Netherlands, in the Olympics as a volleyball player. Paula Radcliffe's comments were that, you do the crime, he served his time, it's a bit like a drug cheat, isn't it? And that's it. And she eventually apologised, but it's just that kind of lack of insight. You cheating, Nathan, and taking a performance-enhancing drugs to a 100-meter sprint
Yeah,
is very different to sexually abusing a child and representing your country. And she would have seen him on TV. It's totally different. So,
was it?
what I say about that is that that's a good example of when could an abuse survivor have contribute to that. There were telephone phone-ins. There's comments on social media. There's campaigns and educations which you can get involved in. But I think that if you are able to support the movement and the campaign, it's really important. When we look at hashtag Me Too, hashtag Black Lives Matter, and things like this, we need as much input as possible because the only way we break this taboo of child and sexual abuse. But I think that the first thing, a bit like your friends have done recently, speaking to you as a gatekeeper, which is what you are going to become, by the way, you can then signpost and say, well, look at that organisation, speak to those people. The more you can signpost, you're going to get movement, and that's what we need to create change.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and I hope people can take something from that. Uh, I wanted to ask you another question more about yourself. Uh, what what reward do you get out of this? Because there must be something for you to gain out of it. I mean, it's a noble thing you do, and I don't mean in a selfish way, like oh, look at me, I'm famous or anything like that. I mean, but what feeling do you get when you get people what you think they deserve financially, and or if they get a conviction, like how does that make you feel?
I think just the fact that people hopefully can trust me, and that's, I mean, it's difficult working with abuse survivors sometimes because they don't trust you inherently.
I think your headset's a bit.
Is that better? Sorry.
Yes, I bet. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
sorry,
It's
Nathan.
okay. It's not no
Yeah.
problem.
Um, and survivors have inherent trust issues. So to be able to get a survivor to trust you, um, is something which is really important, and to be able to see a change. Again, I've used the word change numerous times, and I don't apologize for it. But if you can see something that's changed and it's improved someone's life, it does make an important difference. That's, I mean, the work I do isn't for me, it is generally for survivors and to try to break this as an issue. If I can reduce the average age of disclosure from the 40s to, let's say, the 20s,
Yeah,
I would have succeeded something in my life. And um, it's something which does mean a lot. My dad's a bricklayer, and I asked him this exact question. I don't know, probably about 10 years ago. I said, why do you do that? You just put bricks on top of each other. What do you feel from building it? And he goes, I don't build houses, I build homes. His perspective was that actually that's what I do. And when I go past that house and drive past, I go, oh, that's a lovely family in that home. I made that home for him. When you look on the face of it, you're just building, a wall, which is for a house. So I think that if I am able to make a difference, and I try my absolute best to do so, and no one's perfect in this world, but if I'm able to help someone, that's why I do podcasts and TV, and I don't take a penny for any of it. Um, if I'm able to give something back, it makes a difference. I come from a very working class background, and I really believe in the feeling of community and creating change. I really believe in that, and we do need to help people a lot more. So if I can see I've made a difference, then I can die a happy man. And I think that's the one thing. When I was training to be a corporate lawyer, I wasn't making a difference in my heart. I was just making rich people richer, which is nothing wrong. People want to do that, etc. But for me, I want to die saying, yeah, the world's a better place. And that's why we do lots of work with politicians. That's why we do lots of charity events and talks, and that's why we do podcasts and media pieces. We have to stop abuse because I can't allow my children and my grandchildren to be at exactly the same risk that we were both at. It can't continue, but it's a painful process because it's getting people to appreciate that this is it's a pandemic. Is pandemic the right word? Or and I don't know what the right word is.
pandemic isn't.
It- epidemic. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't think people appreciate it is an epidemic.
It's
One
a
in two
serious
of us.
problem. I don't think people really understand how serious it is, and I think it's
Yeah,
very, very kept under. There's a limit of how
yeah,
serious it is, and how serious the problem, and how many people like. I mean, I know so many. You know what I mean? And it makes me feel a bit lucky that it never happened to me because I've been in a lot of high risk situations,
yeah.
and it's never happened to me, and I don't know why. It
It,
almost happened to me as a child. I was at a train station, vulnerable, about 14, and ran away from a care home. And a man approached me and followed me in the toilet. And he tried. I used to box as a child, so I was able to fight him off, which I was lucky for. And that's the only reason he wasn't very physically strong, and I was. But that could have
yeah,
been very different for me. You know,
yeah, yeah.
I am
I think,
actually a victim. I am actually a victim, really, because he tried. Which
yeah,
is yeah, I am actually a victim. To be fair, yeah, but not
yeah,
that way. And it's
yeah,
just, luckily I wasn't. If you know what I mean,
yeah,
that happened,
yeah,
but it didn't happen. If you know what I'm saying. So
yeah. I think that when we look at life, it's like uh, the cancer thing on BBC and Channel 4 and so on, and raise money for cancer research. One in two of us will get cancer in our lifetime, but the statistics show that one in four of us will suffer sexual abuse or attempted sexual abuse in our lifetime. Um, and I don't think people appreciate that. Like one in four of what we know of, that's pretty bad.
that's a lot.
And
That's a lot of people.
yeah, it is a lot. And when you look at your child and look at mine and others, that does mean that from everyone it's not 60 degrees of separation. Someone in your close network may have suffered abuse, and you will never know about it. And
I know
and that's
so
what's really
many,
worrying.
so many, and it's
Yeah,
because I don't know how people open up to me, but it's just I think it's the work I do, my story, I was in care and stuff like that. I think people feel like comfortable opening up that to me. I'm conscious for time now, Dino, but I wanted to ask you a couple more questions. I like to keep it under an hour, for the viewers and stuff like that. But future direction and personal reflection I wanted to go into. So, what where do you see yourself in the future? I mean, we've discussed this. You want to make changes. What the question I wanted to ask is evolving laws, because to you, isn't it? You are getting a double jeopardy, don't you? Is that something you are actively engaging in?
Yeah, so whether it's positions of trust laws, which we expanded, so it means you can't have sexual um, activities with under 18-year-olds. If you're a sports coach now or a religious leader, we were helped to get that law changed. Whether it's mandatory reporting laws or laws on time limits or double jeopardy or time limits to investigate certain crimes, it is important, again, not just to help the individual, but to raise awareness through the media and then to create change, whether it's through legal cases and or the laws to improve things. So yeah, that does mean a lot. That's been I considered for a long time, would I want to go into politics? And I don't think I do. I think I'm much better as a person who can help, push campaigns and issues. Politics interests me, but again, it's change makers is what you need, and people to buy into it. And when you look at someone like Barack Obama, who wasn't able to stop and change the gun laws in America, the question is why and how. So yeah, changing the laws is really important, and that's why again, the more people can talk about these issues, the bigger the priority, more likely then people will actually do something about it.
That's amazing, and I'd like to thank you for personally, and I think for my viewers as well. And I've shared this podcast with a couple of friends that it was going to take place, and they're quite, I don't think excited the word, but they're interested because they are sufferers, and it's such a complex. I mean, this conversation really made me feel a bit sobering. It's really like I'm going to leave this conversation like, and
Yeah.
we've only touched on a few things because of time and consciousness of time. But yeah, I just think you're an amazing character, extraordinary at the work you do, and it must be so difficult. And I don't know how you must how you cope with it, like the stuff and do you have any therapy or anything like that, or do you not need that? Are you quite resilient to it by now, or has it ever really affected you?
Yeah, I think that the day that an abuse survivor discloses their abuse to me, it doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
It's probably the day I should quit. I think that when you hear from doctors going, another dead body, we move on, and phrases like that, I
Mm.
think that's really weird, actually, because every survivor is different and every issue is different. And there will always be something which catches you. Because even so, it's a personal share, I suppose. Um, the my I went to a comprehensive school, a secondary school, and a teacher was convicted recently. So before my time, they were a teacher there, but they were convicted from my secondary school. And you read it, and it hits you in a different way. So you hear from a child who suffered abuse in a secondary school, and it hits you in one way. You hear from your own secondary school, and it brings up a different feeling.
Mm.
You will see someone who looks like you, sounds like you, had a similar life experience to you. They may use a phrase which brings something back to you. You can see how if this one thing hadn't happened, their life would have been so different. And I can't turn back the hands of time. If I could, I would be doing that rather than being a lawyer. I would definitely try to reverse the time and stop the abuse. I would love to do that, but I'm not. I'm just not capable of doing that, sadly. So yeah, answering your question, yeah, it still affects you, and it's still really sad. And I don't discuss the work I do and the details with my friends or my family. Um, I will discuss things in a general context if they see stuff in the media I've done and the like, but it is really hard to hear these things which have happened to people and people to think, well, it's historical. It's the only criminal offence. People say, well, it's historical rape, isn't it? It's historic child abuse. We don't say historical murder or historic
Mm.
kidnapping or historical drug offences. We say it because it protects us. It's back in the day. It's like the 1980s, wasn't it? Child abuse happened. Well, it's not, mate. It happens now. People are viewing images now. So children are suffering abuse in schools right now. It literally is happening. So I see those people, and I know it's happening. So yeah, it does bring it back, but I try to keep focused on this isn't going to be forever, and
Yeah.
things can get better. This isn't terminal. This is something which we need to do better, and I hope that I'm able to do that in the best way which I can. And yeah, the fact is people do need you to have some resilience, but also you've got to empathize because people are. It's horrendous what people go through and the impact. And I give this example when I do talk. So I broke my leg playing football, and and again, being a typical bloke, an absolute idiot. I tried to run it off because I thought, sprained it, and I thought actually it's quite bad. Got in my car, drove to the hospital, just an idiot. Got out, and I took off my boot, and the bone's poking out, and I've got pins and plates in my leg now. Now, the reason why I explain that story is that I was able to show a doctor and go, look, a bone's poking out. I don't think I can walk on this. I need to get it sorted. Felt a bit of an idiot, shouldn't have run on it, made it worse. An example is, as an abuse survivor, you don't get treated for 30 years. So for my leg, I can't tell you, Dr. Nathan, I'm embarrassed. And I don't think you're going to believe me. And the person who did this to me is in such a high, powerful position. But I know they're doing this to others. So my leg now hasn't been treated. I can't go back to work because I can't walk. I'm now limping because my other leg's a bit funny. My back's funny. It's affecting my relationships. I'm going to be addicted to painkillers now because I'm not getting my leg treated. So I'm only dealing with the symptoms rather than the cause. After 40 years, what state would I be in physically if I didn't have my broken leg fixed? Looking at the NHS and looking at the provisions provided, my
That's
leg
a
was.
great analogy. That's a really good analogy. How you just explained that.
No, it's
Amazing.
definitely true because my broken leg, I got surgery within 48 hours. So pins, plates. I was having physiotherapy for 6 months. I couldn't walk for 6 months because of a bloody idiot damage I'd done to my own foot, my
Yeah.
leg. But like 6 months of therapy, physiotherapy on the NHS for 6 months weekly. If I had suffered mental health issues, and what's interesting is that I didn't work for 6 months, and obviously it has an impact on you on a mental level because I couldn't go out, couldn't do the things I wanted. I didn't get any mental provision, it was only physical. If I suffered sexual abuse, maybe waiting 9 to 18 months for therapy, only limited to 6, not a specialist therapist. You can see the difference between things. So again, what we try to do is to raise this awareness and to create the change. And it's really important. So whenever I think about things and I think about the traumas which you hear and you see,
Mhm.
I always remind myself of the broken leg because it was awful. And I was, down about it. I was properly depressed about it because it was just like, you're frustrating.
Yeah.
But I could tell someone. I didn't have to keep that buried and hide it. And I always remember that in that so many people are suffering this debilitating mental health and the injuries. And the fact they can't tell anyone is just devastating. So, yeah, in relation to therapy, we can reach out to. We do try to reach out to colleagues and therapists and the like. But I think as long as I can process these things and realize that the world isn't evil, but awful things happen, what we need to do is to expose it. In my mind, I can try to process it the best way I can, but we have to see change. If it's still the same level of abuse in 10 years, I'll be absolutely devastated. I really will be, because it'll be a total failure by me.
No, I don't think with people like you fighting the fight and people putting the spotlight on it. And now we've got the internet, the media, things are getting spoken. I think there will be change, and I don't think your efforts will be wasted. I want to wrap it up there, Dino. But we could talk all day, and maybe we'll do another podcast soon because I think there's so much to talk about. But personally, thank you for the work you do, and I know the viewers will be so interested in what you've said. And just keep doing what you're doing. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming on. I know it took us a while to get this done because we were
Yeah.
speaking for a couple of months, but
Yeah.
I'm so glad we did because I've got so much fun and I know other people would as well. And just hats off to you, and just very sobering. It's going to be quite after this conversation. It's going to be whoa a little bit for me because I know we haven't delved into too much like graphics, but it's still it's such a can't really explain what I feel,
Yeah.
but
No, it's
thank
a
you very much.
heavy,
You know. Heavy, isn't it? It's a
no
heavy
problem at all.
subject, and I
It is a heavy subject. Yeah,
and
it is.
you do the day in day out. So you're an extraordinary man, and thank you for what you do.
That's right. Thanks for having me, Nathan. And yeah, if
Yeah,
you're able to talk again, that'd be
thank
good.
you very much. See you later, Dino.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.